Many are still trying to process through the statements from the meeting yesterday between U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping. It was an important meeting as the two leaders had not met face-to-face since Biden had taken office. They had talked via video conference 1 year ago. But the big question is, what's next? Scott Moskowitz is geopolitical risk analyst for Morning Consult, and he joins us to try and see if he can answer that question. All right, Scott, let me start there. What's next?
Well, what's next is that there will be a move back towards high-level dialogue. It's hard to say what the talks accomplished exactly on net, but one thing is that they seem to evoke that both leaders really want to lower the tensions and start to move into more of a direction of consistent dialogue.
So in terms of the relationship right now, there obviously is a lot of tension. There has been. And so this was a good thing. But there is still a lot of concerns from a lot of aspects here in the United States as to how the Chinese government runs their operations day to day, whether it be around the COVID policies, whether around intellectual property, human rights, etc. There are a lot of issues where these two countries really have a big gap in terms of how they view elements.
Yeah, absolutely. That is correct. There are certain red lines. There are certain things that are simply never going to change. And so, when they talk about compromise, a lot of times it's less about compromise in terms of reaching an actual solution. To be honest, the U.S. and China, they're probably never going to reach a meeting of the minds on issues like Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Tibet. There's more room for compromise in issues like trade relations. But for them, compromise means actual talk, actual dialogue, things that can forestall hot conflict or even a cold conflict.
Does potential conversations in the relative near future have a benefit if, in fact, these rumors around a zero COVID policy pulling back, if they move forward? And that opens up a little bit of the concern that has been out there around the production of different products in China and that movement of goods back and forth.
Yeah, I think absolutely. If China starts to pull back on its zero COVID policy, and that's a big if because that's a potential liability for Xi. But if they start to pull back, then production starts to ramp up again, and it throws into question all these issues of trade relations, issues about why U.S. firms are starting to pull back from China, and they can currently point to the fact that, it's driven by logistic concerns. But once China starts ramping back up and you have less of these logistic concerns, there are less lockdowns, hobbling factories, then it really raises the issue. Well, what is this about? Is it going to continue? Is the U.S. government going to strategically continue pushing U.S. firms to diversify their supply chains away from China? And so that opens up a whole other can of worms, of course.
So if you can, talk about this from Xi Jinping's perspective, because he is the quote-unquote president for life in China. Joe Biden, we know, will be up for re-election in 2 years if he decides to run. There could easily be a scenario where Xi Jinping could be playing a little bit of a waiting game, but then again, he wouldn't be assured as to who that next president would be. I guess it's probably a little bit better to try and move some of these elements forward with the president than rather the one you don't know.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. China always benefits from what they call taking the long view. One, you notice they set all of their policy in terms of these 5-year plans, these 5-year agendas. But often their 5-year plans and 5-year agendas have time frames like 20 years, 30 years, things like that. We're going to achieve this by 2050. And we'll make intimations of the same in the U.S. But you get a sense that in China, they really can afford to take the long view, especially now with Xi Jinping. In terms of playing the waiting game, I think there was actually a sense that before the Chinese Communist Party, that is sort of what Xi was doing. And that is possibly why, even more so than a lot of times, U.S.-Chinese relations really seemed to hit a new low this summer because Xi was being almost strategically obstinate. He could not afford to look weak before the 20th Party Congress, before he officially was president for a third term, or as you so eloquently said, president for life, which he may or may not be going forward. But now that he has consolidated power, now that he has been appointed to this third term, he has a lot more leeway. There's no one left in the party that can sort of moderate his influence, and so he can work more comfortably moving forward without any sort of narrow timelines on the horizon. Of course, we have timelines in the U.S., but I think there's a sense that he'd like to start getting things done now while he actually has Biden in power, someone he knows, because who might come next, he doesn't know.
Right, and there are elements then he also has to worry about the Chinese economy and the slowdowns that economy has seen in recent quarters as well, and to try and regain the. I mean, it's going to take a while to get the growth levels we saw a couple of years ago, but still to get the pattern turned in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. You are correct about that. China hasn't suffered from inflation to the extent that everybody else in the world has. They've managed to keep it around lows of a little over 2%. But as their growth slows, for one of the first times other than the beginning of the COVID pandemic, you're going to see Chinese growth match inflation. You'll see that sort of stagnation. And that is a real worry for the Communist Party because that is their main source of legitimacy in the post-socialist or the special socialist era. It is their ability to deliver and guarantee consistent growth. And once that slows down, all bets are off. So certainly he is nervous about that. I shouldn't say all bets are off. It's not a real challenge to power, but it is certainly a threat to their legitimacy and raises questions, why is this guy in power? Why is the Communist Party holding power? So that is a very big concern for them, yes.
Then there is Taiwan, and that seemingly might be the elephant in the room right now. In terms of, we don't really know for certain what China's aspirations are there. We believe we do. We know that it's a very important country body for the United States as well. And it makes you wonder about, how that is going to factor into the relationship between these two presidents and these two countries over the next several years.
Well, I think we clearly do know what China's aspirations are, Taiwan. The one thing we don't know for certain is their timeline. We know that China wants reunification. Yeah. We know that at Xi Jinping's, appointment to his third term at the 20th Party Congress, he said, reunification with Taiwan is a historical inevitability. Yeah. Nothing can stand in its way. The timelines, however, are what are in question. There's been things thrown out like 2050, whether that's a hard timeline, whether that could lead to an invasion. One thing that Biden said after Xi in his speech was that I don't believe that China plans on invading Taiwan anytime next month. And I would have said the same this summer. I think the Chinese were very annoyed about Pelosi's visit because they had to look tough. They had to move tough. They had to show, their capabilities. And there was an element that they perhaps liked being able to move the strategic timeline forward in a certain sense. But I don't think they enjoyed having to do that or the fallout that came from it. But in the run-up to the 20th Party Congress, I think it was simply that she couldn't afford to make that move. And that really elevated tensions to a place that I think neither side was ultimately comfortable with. As much as the U.S. doesn't want China to invade Taiwan anytime soon, I don't believe that China wants to invade Taiwan anytime soon. However, that doesn't mean they could not be, to their mind, forced into a situation where they had to act. And they said what they consider that to be is this red line of Taiwanese declaring independence, or especially the United States pushing them in a direction that it seems like that might be happening. So there is this sense of tentativeness, yes.
I think you also have to throw in the relationship that China has with Russia, and obviously the concerns that most of the world have on how Russia has approached Ukraine lately. Obviously the concerns around energy coming up into the winter. I don't know how much President Biden or the U.S. administration would talk to China about that, but we know that relationship between China and Russia seemingly is important, and that might be another one of those areas where you probably just don't expect much to change over the near term.
I think you're absolutely right. It's a hugely critical relationship, and it's one that gives Xi quite a bit of leverage because he seems to be the one actor in the world with any kind of strategic leverage over Russia. Although if that were put to the test, he might be in an uncomfortable situation because everybody knows certainly it did not seem like Xi wanted the invasion to go forward to begin with right after they had declared this unlimited pact of friendship and been kind of bound together. But on net, there have been certain gains for the Chinese, but for the most part, it has made the world economically and politically more unstable. And stability is something that the Chinese really value and relish. So they have been very frustrated over the war while having to keep up kind of this neutral to supportive face of Russia. So it is a problem. Yeah.
So if you're a business owner, a U.S. business owner that would like to do business in China, and you hear about this meeting, I guess you're nothing really has changed for you right now, because none of the dynamics of what is expected of you if you go into China have changed at this point.
Yeah, nothing has changed, but some timelines have been pushed back. I would say there was a sense of question about whether we need to panic soon if we're a business owner in this situation. And I think this really showed that they want to return back to this period of things aren't perfect, but we're going to make it work, especially issues on Taiwan, which was really what pushed business owners for the first time to start considering this post-China future, this, oh my God, we really have to start planning for the possibility that someday we may be forced politically to exit China en masse the same way businesses were in Russia, except because it's China, it's going to be way more complicated and way more difficult. And this at least gave them a small reprieve. Okay, this is not happening tomorrow, but doesn't mean you should stop planning altogether.
Still a wait and see then, I think, in a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there.
All right, Scott, thanks for your time. All the best.
All right, thank you so much. Bye.
Scott Moskowitz, geopolitical risk analyst with Morning Consult. When we come